What is up, guys, and welcome to CheekyMMA. This is the first video on the channel, so I'm excited to finally kick things off. Here on CheekyMMA, we'll be covering UFC betting picks, full fight breakdowns, underdog plays, some post-fight analysis, and the biggest MMA news from around the world. So whether you're looking for betting insights, fight predictions, or just want to talk MMA, you've come to the right place. Honestly, I can't think of a bigger way to kick things off than with the UFC White House card. This isn't just another UFC event. This is a once-in-a-generation type of card. The UFC putting on an event at the White House is something that would have sounded completely crazy just a few years ago. And now we're potentially looking at one of the most historic cards the sport's ever seen. The storylines heading into this event are absolutely incredible. Can Alex Pereira become the first ever 3-division UFC champion? And if he does that put him straight into the conversation as the greatest fighter of all time? Then you've got Justin Gaethje taking on Ilia Topuria. We know Topuria, he looks unstoppable, but if there's anyone capable of, changing a fight with a single punch, it's Justin Gaethje. Can he become the first man to knock out Topuria inside the UFC? Today we're breaking down every fight, looking at the stylistic matchups and paths to victory for each fighter, the betting value of course, and making our official picks on the UFC White House cards. Grab a drink and get comfortable. Kicking off the UFC White House card, we got Diego Lopes taking on Steve Garcia. This is a really intriguing matchup because both guys are dangerous finishers. But when I break this fight down, I keep coming back to the fact that Diego Lopes simply has more ways to finish a fight. Looking at Steve Garcia first, he's coming into this fight on an impressive run. He's built a reputation of one of the more dangerous finishers in the division. Garcia isn't the type of fighter that likes to slowly work his way into a fight. He comes forward guns blazing, pretty aggressive, throws from the hip with some serious power. He looks to put opponents under pressure from the opening bell. If you're backing Steve Garcia, you're probably backing him to do his best work early on, Garcia's path to victory is pretty clear, so he needs to keep this fight standing, make it ugly, he needs to force a firefight and land something significant in the first 7 or 8 minutes. That's where he's going to be in his finest form and his most dangerous. So now we're going to look at Diego Lopes. This is where things start to get interesting. Lopes is one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC right now because of how many weapons he brings into the cage. Honestly, he's dangerous on the feet. He can scrap, he can bang, he can punch on, with the best of them. He's dangerous in scrambles. He can submit you awkwardly. He's got one of the most aggressive submission games in the division, to be honest. What matters more is the variety in Lopes, though. So game compared to Garcia's, if Lopes wants to strike, he can. If Lopes wants to grapple, he can. If Lopes, starts getting overwhelmed on the feet, that is an option he can look at. When I look at past the victory, Garcia's route, feels, fairly narrow in comparison. He needs to hurt Lopes. He needs to hurt him, and he needs to hurt him earlier. So, Lopes, on the other hand, can win a striking battle over 3 rounds. He can outskill him. He can stand by that jab. He can find a submission during a grapple exchange with his awkwardness, or he can simply survive the early storm and start taking over as the fight progresses. If Garcia starts wearing down, he's going to be in a bad place. That's ultimately why I'm leaning towards Diego Lopes. Not because I think Garcia isn't dangerous, he absolutely is, but because Lopes has more answers to the questions, really. He has the more complete skill set, more weapons, more experience at this stage as well, so in my opinions, he's got more paths to victory. Now let's talk betting, let's talk money. So the safest play in this fight is obviously Diego Lopes for the money line. That's the safe one. If you're looking for a little more value, I really like Diego Lopes by submission. Depending on where you are on the market, if we're getting somewhere around $3 to $4, that's a bet I'd definitely be interested in. For those chasing a bigger payout, though, I'd be looking for Diego Lopes by round 2. If you can do the Mystic Mac prediction and predict a round 2 submission, you know, that can pay even more lucratively as well. So my official pick for this fight is Diego Lopes to get the victory. Most likely outcome is Lopes by submission. Next up, we got Bo Nickal taking on Kyle Daukaus. Stylistically, this is one of the more interesting fights on the card. When people look at this fight, the first thing they're going to think about is Bo Nickal's wrestling, you know, for good reasons. Nickal is one of the most accomplished wrestlers we've, you know, pretty much seen transition into mixed martial arts. His ability to control where a fight takes place is elite, and that's a massive weapon to have in MMA, and it's been evident. He's been on quite a tear. The biggest question surrounding Bo Nickal throughout his UFC career hasn't been his wrestling. You know, we already know that's world class. The question has always been, how is his overall MMA game? You know, that continues to develop as he faces tougher and tougher competition. Standing across from him is Kyle Daukaus, so, you know, a fighter who's far more experienced inside the UFC and a guy who is very comfortable in grappling exchanges himself. You know, Daukaus isn't the type of fighter who's going to panic in this if this fight hits the mat. You know, he's a strong submission artist as well. You know, good positional awareness and enough experience to make things pretty damn difficult for Bo Nickal if Nickal starts making mistakes, you know. That's what makes this matchup so interesting, though, is a lot of opponents have entered fights against Bo knowing exactly what's coming, but they still can't do anything to stop it. The challenge for Daukaus is stopping the elite wrestling and knowing it's coming. You know, they're two different things. When I look at Kyle Daukaus' path to victory, I think it revolves around extending the fight and forcing Bo into situations he hasn't really experienced often. You know, if Daukaus can survive the early game, you know, the early wrestling exchanges, you know, make Nickal work, drag him into deeper waters, that's where his experience can become a serious factor. For Bo Nickal, on the other hand, though, the path to victory is much more straightforward. Use that wrestling, dictate where the fight takes place, secure takedowns. You know, we want to see long periods of time controlling the action. If he can establish top position consistently, he will likely spend most of the fight exactly where he wants to be. It's not the fun fight we want to see, but it guarantees the victory. Ultimately, this really comes down to whether Daukaus can stop Nickal from his game plan. Personally, I don't think he can. Nickal's wrestling advantage is simply too great. It's too strong to ignore. Even against experienced opposition, we've consistently seen elite wrestlers control fights when they're able to dictate where the fight takes place, and I think Bo Nickal has every opportunity to do exactly that here. So we're going to move on to the betting side of things. My safest play in this fight is Bo Nickal on the money line. So as I'm recording this now, Bo Nickal is sitting at around $1.30, which tells the you know, the bookmakers see him as a fairly strong favorite. I think he wins this fight, but at that price, I'm not sure there's a huge amount of value left in the line, if I'm being honest. If you're looking for a bit more pop, I'd be looking at Bo Nickal by decision. Daukaus, you know, he's a tough and experienced fighter. I wouldn't be surprised to see him survive the onslaught that Bo brings him. You know, if Nickal controls the fight with his wrestling without finding a finish, a decision victory is a very realistic outcome. Current markets have that around 375 to 390, which is, you know, a bit better than the straightforward money line. For those chasing a bigger payout, Bo Nickal by submission would be the long shot. If Nickal establishes dominant position on the ground, opportunities can present themselves. So if you want to take a punt on Bo by submission, that's looking at around $5. It's probably the prop that interests me the most from a value perspective. So my official pick for this one is Bo Nickal to get the victory. He is most likely going to win by decision. Next up, we got Mauricio Ruffy taking on Michael Chandler. This is one of the fights I'm so excited to watch. Dude, Michael Chandler fights, there is almost a guarantee that something crazy is going to happen. Win or lose, Chandler fights are an absolute ridiculous pace. He takes on risks. You know, he puts himself in dangerous situations. That's why fans love watching him, let's be honest. The problem is that, you know, those same traits that make Chandler so exciting are also the traits that have started costing him fights. Chandler's at that stage of his career where he's taking a lot of damage. You know, he's involved in a lot of wars. You know, he's heading towards the best part of 40 years old. It's not the fastest anymore. You know, those exchanges become increasingly more dangerous for him. Standing across from Mauricio Ruffy is one of the fastest rising, you know, prospects in the lightweight division. You know, Ruffy's built a reputation on explosive striking, spectacular finishes, and this is against a guy that's slowing down at this stage and is very hittable. You know, the UFC clearly thinks highly of Mauricio Ruffy, and this matchup feels like a major opportunity to prove he belongs amongst the division's elite. When I look at Michael Chandler's path, it's actually pretty simple. He needs to make this fight chaotic, and he needs to pressure Ruffy early, force him to be uncomfortable, get in weird exchanges, and remind everyone he still possesses a little bit of juice, little bit of pep in his step, a bit of a fight-ending power, a bit of a overhand right. If Chandler wins this fight, right, by knockout, I don't see him winning any other way. If I'm fair, he has to really win by knockout, so he really does need to come in guns blazing here. For Mauricio Ruffy, the path to victory is quite different. He needs to stay composed. You know, he needs to manage that distance. He needs to avoid getting drawn into that reckless fireball of death, which is Michael Chandler, and trust his technique. You know, he needs to be longer. He needs cleaner strikes. He's younger. He's probably fitter because he's younger. You know, he can land more because he's accurate. What really stands out to me is the difference in where these two fighters are in their careers. Chandler is still dangerous. In fact, he's dangerous until every second of the fight is over, but Ruffy feels like a fighter on the rise, while Chandler feels like a fighter trying to hold up his place near the top of the division. You know, that's ultimately why I'm leaning towards Mauricio Ruffy. I think he's faster. I think he's cleaner striking. I think he's got more ways to win this matchup. Yeah, let's talk the money. Obviously, the money line is Mauricio Ruffy. He's at $1.15, you know, to $1.17. Chandler's around $5 though, so if he does pull off that crazy overhand right, and you want a crazy dog pick, Chandler is your dog for the underdog pick. $5 to 1, chuck a 50 on that baby and pray for the overhand right. That's basically why I'm going to go for Mauricio Ruffy to get the victory. He's younger, he's quicker, he's slicker, he's better, he's faster, he's on the rise. I love you, Michael Chandler, but I just think it's Mauricio Ruffy's time. So I think Mauricio Ruffy's actually going to get this by knockout. I think he's going to stop Michael Chandler. I think he's too long, he cracks too well, and it's just going to be his night. Mauricio Ruffy by KO. Next up, we got Josh Hokit taking on Derrick Lewis. This is one of the most fascinating fights on the card. On one side, you got one of the hottest prospects in the heavyweight division. On the other side, you got one of the most dangerous knockout artists the UFC has ever seen. And that's exactly what makes this fight so interesting. You got Derrick Lewis. At this point in his career, everyone knows exactly what Derrick Lewis brings to the table. He's not trying to outscore you. He's not trying to win technical exchanges. Derrick Lewis is looking to separate you from your soul. The crazy thing about Lewis is that he's dangerous right up until the final second of the fight. I'm not going to say he's got the greatest gas tank, but he is always dangerous. We've seen him lose rounds, get outworked, get outgrappled, and then suddenly land one punch and change the outcome of the whole fight. If you're backing Derrick Lewis, you're backing his power. It's as simple as that. His way to victory is crystal clear. The fight keeps standing. And he lands that big kibosh on Josh. Now let's talk about Mr. Josh Hokit. Hokit has quickly become one of the most talked about prospects in the heavyweight division. He's undefeated, you know, riding a wave of momentum. Recently picked up a win over Curtis Blades. That was one of the best scraps in the heavyweight division. What stands out to me about Hokit is his his fitness, his engine for a heavyweight. He pushes an incredible pace. He's willing to wrestle. He can strike. He's willing to make fights ugly, just like he did with the Curtis fight. And like a lot of heavyweights, he doesn't seem to slow down nearly as much as you'd expect. His legs were shaking, but that pace he was pushing, anyone's legs would have been shaking in that fight. So when I look at, Hokit's path to victory, I basically think it revolves around making Derrick Lewis work and tire the big beast out, push the pace. If Lewis can defend a few takedowns here and there and miss quite a few times, it's going to be much beneficial for the Hokit. Hokit needs to avoid the big power shots early though. That fight starts out with a massive storm of an absolute wild beast. It's going to be ugly, those 5 minutes, man. I feel sorry for Josh in those first 5 minutes. It's going to be hard, it's going to be ugly. I am leaning towards Josh Hokit though, not because Derrick Lewis isn't dangerous. Trust me, he's always dangerous, but Hokit feels like the younger, fresher, and complete fighter right now. He's got the different avenues. He can switch it up. He can use his wrestling. He's got the fitness. I just think he has more avenues to win. I think he's too competitive and stupid to stand there and want to strike with such a dangerous nuclear power like Derrick Lewis. So now we're talking the betting line. Safe money line's Josh Hokit. Josh Hokit's coming in for a general win on the money line, about $1.30 to $1.35. Derrick Lewis is paying about $3.40 to $3.70, so he's quite the dogs. And to be honest, that's a very good underdog. One Derrick Lewis overhand right, and seems to be the overhand rights that are winning a lot of these underdogs. Yeah, but if you just want a little bit more value, I'd be looking at Josh Hokit by decision. We just saw him go 3 hard rounds against Curtis Blaydes, and I can definitely see a scenario where he controls a large portion of this fight through the pace, the pressure, and wrestling without even finding a finish. Those chasing an even bigger payout, Josh Hokit by submission, is probably the prop that interests me the most. Derrick Lewis has historically had issues when elite wrestlers are able to dominate positions. We've seen what happened with Daniel Cormier. And Derrick Lewis, if Hokit gets on the top consistently, opportunities can definitely present themselves. Yet again, on the underdog path, Derrick Lewis is also a good one by KO. But yeah, my official pick for this one is Josh Hokit to get the victory, and most likely Josh Hokit will win by decision, I actually think. Next up, we got Sean O'Malley taking on Aiemann Zahabi. Stylistically, this is a really interesting fight as well. I honestly think the betting market may be underestimating just how tough a test Zahabi could be. We're going to start off with Sean O'Malley though. When Sean O'Malley is at his best, he's one of the most dangerous and creative strikers in the entire UFC. His movement is unique, his shot selection is unpredictable, and he has the ability to find openings that a lot of fighters simply just don't see. What makes O'Malley dangerous isn't just his power, it's the fact that he can hit you from angles you don't expect. He can fight long range, he can counter, he can lead the exchanges. When he gets into a rhythm, it becomes incredibly difficult to deal with. The question coming into this fight is how O'Malley responds after some tough competition at the very top of the division. We know how talented he is, but against elite opposition, every small mistake becomes magnified. Standing across from him is Aiemann Zahabi, and I think Zahabi is a lot better than many casual fans give him credit for, to be honest. Zahabi isn't flashy, he's not out there, chasing viral knockouts, but what he is disciplined. He's technical, he's durable. With Zahabi is his ability to stay composed. He doesn't overextend, which is a lot of the times when Sean O'Malley can capitalize on his counters. He doesn't make any reckless decisions. He's usually in the right position defensively. When I look at Zahabi's path to victory, I think it revolves around making this an ugly and frustrating fight for O'Malley. He needs to close that distance, take away the kicking, take away those teeps and the long roundhouses, force Sean to work every minute of the round, try and get him breathing hard, make him earn every exchange. If Zahabi can do that, this fight becomes more competitive than people might expect. For O'Malley, the path to victory is the obvious. manage the distance, use the reach, use the movement, stay on the outside, pick Zahabi apart with cleaner and more effective striking. If this fight takes place at Sean O'Malley's preferred range, I think he'll be landing the more damaging shots throughout the contest. He's a sniper. That's ultimately why I'm leaning towards Sean O'Malley. I think he's the more dynamic striker. I think he has the greater finishing upside. And I think over the course of 15 minutes, he'll create more opportunities to win rounds. That said, I don't think this is quite a one-sided as people are making it out to be. If we're talking money now, so my safest play is obviously with Sean. Sean's sitting at $1.25. Zahabi is at $4 to $4.50 as the underdog. The bookmakers clearly favour O'Malley, and it's easy to understand why. If you're looking for a bit of value, you can go for Sean by decision. Zahabi is a durable fighter, so he might be able to withstand that absolute storm of counter-punching that Sean O'Malley can bring to the table. You can definitely see a scenario where O'Malley controls the striking exchanges from a distance without necessarily finding a stoppage. O'Malley by decision is generally paying somewhere around $240 to $280, so that is quite lucrative if he stays on the outside. For those chasing a bigger payout, Sean O'Malley by KO or TKO. We're looking at Sean for about $275 to $325 in that range. But yeah, look guys, the underdog angle on this one. The dog. If you're picking the dog, Aiemann Zahabi, this is actually quite lucrative, around $4 to $4.50 to 1. Yeah, but like I said, my official pick for this is Sean O'Malley to get the victory. I think Sean's going to get this done by decision. Alright guys, it's time for the co-main event. This is one of the most fascinating fights not only on this card, but potentially in recent UFC history. We got Alex Pereira taking on Ciryl Gane. The stakes couldn't be any higher. If Alex Pereira wins this fight, he becomes the first ever 3-division UFC champion. Let that sink in for a moment. From Glory Kickboxing Champion to UFC Middleweight Champion to UFC Light Heavyweight Champion and now potentially Heavyweight Champion. If Pereira pulls this off, we're talking about one of the greatest combat sport careers we've ever seen. And I may be a little biased because he is my favourite fighter of all time. Now let's start with Ciryl Gane though. From a pure technical standpoint, Gane is one of the most gifted heavyweights. His footwork is exceptional for such a big unit. His movement is exceptional for a bloke that comfortably walks around at 250 pounds. He just shouldn't be able to move that way, but he does. Unlike most heavyweights, Gane doesn't rely purely on power. He's a technician. He can pick you apart. His combos are second to none. His range is great. He picks you apart. He takes his time. When Gane is fighting at his preferred pace, he's incredibly difficult to deal with, man. He's faster than most heavyweights, he's more mobile than most heavyweights, his striking is better than most heavyweights. Look, Gane has a very good chance. This fight is very much a coin flip fight. If Gane wins this fight, I think it's because he's able to use that movement, avoid the shots from Pereira and force Pereira into a longer and more technical fight. The longer this fight remains competitive without a finish, the more I think it actually starts to favour Gane. But we're going to talk about the man, Alex Pereira. At this point, I'm not sure there's much left to say, but he hasn't already said Alex Pereira might be the scariest striker in the UFC. Every single second you're standing in front of him, you're in danger. We've seen elite fighters win rounds against Pereira. We've seen elite fighters have success against Pereira, and then suddenly it doesn't matter anymore because Pereira lands one left hook and the fight is over. That's what makes him so special. He doesn't need 5 opportunities. He doesn't need 10 opportunities. He only needs the one. When I look at Pereira's path to victory, it comes down to pressure and power. He needs to cut off the cage. He needs to force exchanges, make Gane stand his ground, and eventually find that fight changing shot. Big question is, whether Gane can avoid Pereira's power for 25 minutes. Personally, I don't think he can. That's not a knock on Gane. Yet again, Pereira's my favourite fighter. Could be a bit biased in this match. I think realistically it is a bit of a coin flip matchup. But yeah, so if we're going to talk about the betting now, let's get down to the money. Safest play in this fight is probably Pereira on the money line, due to the fact that he does have that one-punch knockout power, whereas Gane's a big boy, he hits hard, but we haven't really seen him switch people's lights out with that one punch. He usually drags it on a bit longer and yeah, drags it out a bit harder. Pereira is sitting around $1.70 to $1.85 at the moment. Ciryl Gane is paying around $2 to $2.20 as the underdog. If you're looking for a bit more value, I really like Pereira though by KO. If Pereira wins, that's the most likely outcome. Pereira knockout is basically around $2.40 to $3 at the moment. That could change though as we get closer to the fight. If you're backing Ciryl Gane though, I'd be looking at decision. He could make it a technical, counter long range bout with Pereira and not get that left hook to the head and make it ugly for Pereira and drag him out to a loss over the 25 minutes. Depending on the sports bet, Gane by decision could pay anywhere from $4.50 to $6.50, and if you're a believer in his movement technical advantage, that's probably the bet that makes the most sense. For those chasing a bigger payout, Gane by decision is definitely the value underdog play. But yeah, my official pick for this fight is Alex Pereira to get the victory, and most likely outcome for Pereira to do so will be by KO. And now it's time for the main event, Ilia Topuria and Justin Gaethje. Because we've got two of the most dangerous fighters in the sport going head to head, the stakes couldn't be any higher. On one side you got Ilia Topuria, the undefeated champion, who has looked almost unstoppable throughout his whole UFC career. On the other side, you got Justin Gaethje, one of the most violent fighters we've ever seen step foot inside that octagon. The biggest question heading into this fight is pretty simple. Can Justin Gaethje become the first man to knock out Ilia Topuria? Or even just the first man to beat him? Let's start with Ilia Topuria though. At this point, it's becoming increasingly difficult to find any weakness in his game. His boxing is elite, his timing is elite, everything is elite, his power is godly. Everything else is elite, his power is godly. And perhaps most importantly, he's composed under pressure, man. This guy, he's pretty damn stoic. What makes Topuria so dangerous isn't just the fact that he hits hard, it's the fact that he hits clean. He doesn't waste shots, he's accurate. He's a sniper of all snipers. He doesn't throw himself out of position. Very, very rarely have I seen that happen. When he hurts opponents, he usually finishes them because he's just got that nuclear power. We've seen him knock out some of the biggest names in the sport. Australia's own Volkanovski knocked out Charles, knocked out Max Holloway. Who knocks out? No one knocks out Max Holloway. Ilia Topuria knocked out Max Holloway. That's how hard Ilia Topuria hits. Now we'll talk Justin Gaethje. If Topuria is the surgeon, Justin Gaethje is the butcher. Gaethje has built an entire career around chaos, pressure, violence, and absolute fight-ending power as well. The thing about Justin Gaethje is that no matter who he's fighting, he always has a chance. All he needs is that one as well, that one right hand, that one left hook, one wild exchange, and suddenly the entire fight changes. That's why this matchup is so fascinating. When I look at Gaethje's path to victory, it revolves around turning this fight into a war. He needs to somehow pressure Topuria. He needs to make Topuria somehow feel uncomfortable. He needs to force exchanges and drag him into awkward positions of the fight. If this becomes a technical boxing match, it's going to heavily favor Topuria. Topuria's disciplines, composure, his cleaner boxing, he can pick Justin Gaethje off quite bad, and then I guess if he does what he's done to everyone else, it's not going to be good for Justin Gaethje in that regard either. Justin Gaethje is still one of the most dangerous men in the UFC. He's been through countless wars. Topuria is younger. He's fresher. He appears to be in his prime. It's ultimately why I'm leaning towards Ilia Topuria. Not because I think Gaethje can't win. He definitely can. I think he's one of the few fighters in the sport with the power to completely change this fight with a single punch. But when I look at the totality of the matchup, I see more pass for Topuria. You know, he's cleaner striker, more technical striker, and I think he'll be landing first more often than not. So let's get on to the money. Let's talk about the betting. My safe play in this fight is Topuria for the money line. He's sitting at about $1.35 to $1.45 right now. Justin is sitting at $2.80 to $3.20 as the underdog. If you're looking for a bit more squeeze out of that lemon, I'd go for Topuria by KO. You know, Topuria by KO's paying by $2.20 to $2.80 at the moment. Yeah, look, if you are looking for the underdog though, if you're looking for the Justin Gaethje KO, we're looking at between $4.50 to $6.50. That's an incredible underdog pick. He is the dog of all dogs that ever dogged. Justin Gaethje, potentially around $5 to even $6 by KO. This is a possibility now. We all know that he can do it. He could pull it off. For the underdog picks, it'd almost be difficult to not place a bit of money on Gaethje by knockout. Yeah, but overall, I'm going for Topuria. I think Topuria gets the victory by KO. I know that sounds counterintuitive for what I just said, but I just think he's too much of a sniper. You know, his bullets are too explosive, and that so far they've put everyone else down, and I just think that's going to be the case this time. Topuria by knockout. And there you have it, guys. Those are my full betting picks and predictions for the UFC Freedom 250 White House card. To quickly recap my favorite plays on the card, my safest pick is Diego Lopes on the money line. My value bet of the night is Alex Pereira by KO or TKO. My underdog play of the night is Justin Gaethje by KO. Now, as always, these are just my opinions. MMA is the craziest sport on the planet. It only takes one punch, one takedown, or one mistake to completely change a fight. I'd love to hear your picks down in the comments below. Which predictions do you agree with? Which predictions do you disagree with? And who is your lock of the night? If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe because this is just the beginning for CheekyMMA. We'll be covering betting picks, underdog plays, post-fight analysis, and all the biggest MMA news moving forward. Thank you all for watching. Enjoy the fights, guys. Good luck with your bets, and I'll catch you in the next one.